You know, a lot of people come up to me on the street and say, gee, Derek, you're really good looking. Or they say, gee, Derek, you look really good. Or, Derek, gee, look good you do, really. Or, good day, looking late, you good look, day, Eric, J.D., okay, lay? I'm scared.
When I was younger, one of the first major celebrity crushes I had was Disney Channel era Zac Efron. This guy was fresh out of High School Musical and was your picture-perfect teen heartthrob. Pretty blue eyes, perfectly styled hair, a mastered smolder, all wrapped up in that boy next door charm. And I wasn't alone in spooning after this dude. I couldn't browse through a teen magazine at the time without seeing this guy's face somewhere on the cover, if not taking up the entire cover itself. He was hot shit among the ladies in the 2000s. He even sang a song about it. And Hollywood made sure to double down on that by having him play the romantic lead every chance he got. With those looks and charisma though, none of us were really surprised. But Efron's just one out of many male stars who landed the famed status of a Hollywood pretty boy. An artist who isn't just fond after for his talents, but also for his stylish, sleek, and at times, more effeminate brand of male beauty. They often look like the antithesis of the overly macho, rugged tough guy, banking on their youth and sporting a much softer or even eccentric appearance. Among Efron's time, there was also Robert Pattinson, The Deep, the Jonas Brothers, emo gods Pete Wentz and Gerard Way, all gracing the centerfolds of J14 and winning the hearts of fangirls everywhere. That said, extreme popularity is always a double-edged sword, and can often come with just as much scorn as admiration, particularly for guys with this target audience and specific brand image. I mean, us millennials will definitely remember the age of searing hate brought upon 16-year-old Justin Bieber. So in this video, I wanted to explore all of that. I am a fan of pretty boys myself, Chalamet over a Hemsworth brother any day, and specifically look into what gives them such massive appeal both in real life and in fiction, and the subsequent ridicule or derision some male stars have traditionally faced for playing into the archetype. Is this also just an excuse for me to research hot people? Yes.
Seems Allegra's a no-show, which is simply a bore, but I'll partner you in bridge. Why the pout?
Would they? It were so simple.
We can trace the widespread popularity of the pretty boy archetype back to none other than, surprise, surprise, Hollywood media. In fact, starting from the 1920s, these dudes were in a whole industry category of their own known as matinee idols. Male film stars who were intensely adored by a primarily female audience, usually casted in romantic or dramatic leads, and often known, of course, for their good looks. Like with many modern pretty boy celebrities, there was typically a very delicate, youthful, yet seductively alluring vibe to their overall appeal. In their early days, famous dudes of this type would also be alternatively referred to as lovers. Many of them were from Latin American or South European descent, thus gaining the title of Latin lovers, and would play romantic leads of the same racial background. It was an archetype that grew in popularity, seemingly driven by Hollywood's pursuit of European film audiences at the time, a market considered to be of a much more refined taste, so to speak. Some of the most notable matinee idols throughout the years include Wallace Reid and Rudolph Valentino from the 20s, the latter of whom launched the Latin lover concept to fame, Errol Flynn, who famously played Robin Hood from the 30s, and radio, TV, and film star Guy Madison from the 40s. An amusing little detail I found on the Matinee Idol Wikipedia page is this magazine clipping of Wallace Reid that says, "The only reason why they don't let Wally play in dress suit roles all the time is that the casualties among the ladies would soon empty the picture houses. In fact, we feel that we're toying with the fan hearts even to print this picture." Which brings me to a key ingredient of the whole pretty boy phenomenon: the fangirls.
I'd seen Titanic 7.5 times in theaters. He was the love of my life.
Which most of us ladies have been at some point or another, or still am, you know, my Pinterest feed says it all. So the terms and aesthetics for Hollywood pretty boys have evolved over the years. I mean, these days, matinee idol is actually a pretty old-fashioned term. It's been replaced with teen idols or teen heartthrobs. And they're no longer guys in these dapper Mad Men-esque suits, but more like barista-core flannel shirts and turtlenecks. I am also liking this growing trend of Prince and the high-fashion rock star look. The David Bowie aesthetic's coming back with these boys, and I'm all here for it. But there is one thing that's remained a constant, and that's the hordes of screaming, devoted teen girls that make up a highly passionate part of their fan base. But if you take away their good looks, what else is there that drives their appeal, particularly among young female audiences? And I think a lot of it comes down to their portrayal in popular fiction. I mean, they did have their roots in being typecast as suave romantic leads, and even today they're often characterized as the more mysterious, sensitive, and emotionally expressive character. He may not be the beefy gym rat who's constantly equipped with a football, but he'll write you sweet poetry and spout nihilistic philosophies that he probably pulled off of Tumblr. Overall, he's just stereotypically depicted in stories as being the softer or more intriguing male archetype. Usually both physically, these guys often have a more, I guess, cute or androgynous look, and also in terms of his personality, being more in tune with his feelings and such. Contrast this to the polar opposite trope of the Jack Chad, who typically gets unfairly relegated to either the role of a boy or a dimwit with a single brain cell to play sports. In fact, we can even trace this back to the concept of the Latin lover in the 20s. It was a type that intentionally opposed the more hyper-masculine, man-of-action type of male characters that dominated cinema at the time. Apparently, part of this was linked to the tragedies of World War I. In its aftermath, people were supposedly losing faith in and questioning this idea of men always having to be domineering or superior, or of the action hero type, basically. So in movies that play to this quintessential pretty boy cliche, he'll usually come off as an attractive romantic option to root for. Typically, if he isn't already the type you'd be willing to take home to your parents, well, he's a damaged or troubled person beneath those good looks, but still charismatic enough to have massive I can fix him energy. But of course, I am talking pure media stereotypes here just to narrow down the definition of a pretty boy, because it can really just mean any guy who's good looking, regardless of character. But more often than not, the term is usually reserved for the charming dudes with a more feminine appeal to their features. Hence why people call them pretty, which is usually a word you'd use to compliment girls and women. It's also indicative of an age-old trope more commonly used in fiction back then, that to have exceptional good looks automatically means you're a good person or a better romantic match, which is obviously not the case in real life. But honestly, if these tropes were still played straight in stories today, I'd argue it's just mid or lazy writing at this point. Though with the pretty boy historically embodying this sort of character in film or TV, it's no wonder audiences would typically project those sorts of romantically appealing traits onto this type of male look or aesthetic. But we don't have to look too far to find plenty of pretty boy characters who break this mold. Nate Jacobs from Euphoria is among the prettiest of the male cast, but is an irredeemably psychotic asshole. At least from what I've seen, I haven't finished the second season. And then you've got the series You, Penn Badgley ain't bad in the eyes and plays into all the nice guy aspects of the pretty boy, but turns out to be a manipulative stalker. And movies from the early 2000s up have already melded both the archetype of the jock and the sensitive pretty boys together. Look no further than Steve Harrington from Stranger Things or Troy Bolton from High School Musical.
Why am I feeling so wrong? My head's in the game, but my heart's in the song.
Classic. But outside the world of teen movies and romantic fiction, the pretty boy look could also be embraced by celebrities and used to market their personal brand in real life. Of course, this is an easy transition for those who've already played these types of characters in film and TV. They just need to carry those same good looks from their on-screen roles to the red carpet. But others, such as those from the music industry, think boy bands and male pop singers, may intentionally cultivate this sort of image or persona for themselves as part of their branding. Now pair the idealistic, romantic notion surrounding the pretty boy aesthetic with a star's magnetic charisma and talent, and it does nothing but wonders for their career. But with great power and adoration comes the great inevitable wave of hate.
Now they look up to some twit instead of looking up to Thomas Jefferson or looking up to Nikola Tesla or looking up to Magellan. I mean, kids, Magellan's a lot cooler than Justin Bieber. They want to shut out of your mind talking about Justin Bieber. It's pure evil!
I don't want to knock on the legitimate criticism surrounding pretty boy stars and the types of media or entertainment they produce. A lot of them I agree with. Like, I think it's perfectly valid to think certain boy bands sound too manufactured, or to have your gripes with the media industry prioritizing someone's looks over their actual talent. But something I've noticed throughout the different generations of pretty boy stars, and I can speak from my own observations from the 2000s and 2010s, is that a lot of people also just hated these guys for sport. Like, they turned to baseless personal attacks. Calling them gay was a popular insult of choice. Hyperbolic statements like how they're a disgrace to entertainment, or even wishing them death, facetiously or otherwise. Regardless of how serious these comments actually were, they all made one thing perfectly clear. It was uncool and tasteless to like a lot of these guys, especially if they came with a highly passionate female fan base. I mean, we don't have to look too far back to remember how being a fan of popular pretty boy artists like One Direction, Justin Bieber, or Robert Pattinson would probably get you an eye roll from people who claimed they listen to real music or like real men. Just as they've built themselves an empire of screaming fangirls, the success of many of these guys, especially in previous decades, almost always came attached with widespread scorn and ridicule. The tides are changing now, of course, but I'll get into that later. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't that just the natural course of fame for most stars? Become popular enough and you're bound to find your haters? But if you think about the flip side of this male archetype, say the hunky action hero male power fantasy types like Jason Momoa, Idris Elba, George Clooney, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, all good looking and just as popular, you likely won't find websites or social media accounts or opinion pieces dedicated to passionately hating on them, despite having their fair share of critics. Like, Jason Momoa is an A-lister, fawned over by both men and women alike. Just look at his chaotic meet and greets. But something tells me 4chan isn't about to trick his fan base into shaving their heads or committing self-harm just because they find his popularity annoying. Fortunately, it never worked, but they did actually attempt that with Justin Bieber's fans in 2013. So what's the difference between the two? Why is it that one's treated with more widespread respect than the other? One theory of mine is the typical disdain for guys who don't exactly fit the wider societal idea of how a real man looks or acts. If you embrace a softer, more feminine look and dance around singing earnest love songs or play sappy, emotional characters in romances, then stereotypically, you're often more susceptible to ridicule than the traditionally masculine or macho-looking dude who's got a more physically and emotionally tough demeanor. On top of that, history has shown that most of the entertainment or social interests primarily dominated by women, especially teenage girls, are often seen as less sophisticated or deserving of less respect, oftentimes, as we've seen, even met with mockery, compared to the interests or popular media marketed to and primarily consumed by men. In an article for U News, Aman Rahman notes that these widespread negative views of fangirls stem from long-existing systems of misogyny and patriarchy, one that created a system in which the interests of men have historically been placed at the forefront of society, while women's were diminished.
How many girls do you know actually have hobbies?
This might be the most sexist thing I'll ever say, but do girls have hobbies? There's a select few, but it's rare.
Like, what are your hobbies? Oh, I listen to music. I like to travel. You like to travel, eh? Who the f doesn't like to travel?
Yeah.
Come on.
I like going to the beach too.
Wow.
You're right. I don't know a single woman who has a hobby.
It's how the whole trend of not being like the other girls came about. Just as men would traditionally refuse to stoop to the level of feminine interests, so do women who feel the need to do this just so they aren't generalized or seen as basic or vapid. SLU professor Dr. Amanda Izzo states that some part of this may come out of widely shared stereotypes and expectations that men are rational actors, that they use reason and deliberation to move through the world. The corresponding stereotype is that women are emotional, subject to irrational and unreasonable feelings that make them behave in ways that show a lack of control and intellectual capacity. After all, the root of the word hysteria refers to the uterus. And so, to be a part of the fangirls of these pretty boy artists may, consciously or subconsciously, come off as unsophisticated or trivial to a lot of people, and unfairly so. Another little example would be in the case of movies. I don't really care much about the term chick flick, but it's interesting to me how we've got a gendered and somewhat derisive label for films primarily catered to female audiences, say romances, while more male-centric films like action movies, you know, they're just called movies. I mean, no one really says guy flick Some people might have, but there definitely isn't a whole Wikipedia page for the term. Even revered male artists now used to be treated with ridicule back when fangirls shot them to fame. Take, for example, the Beatles, widely known as one of the most groundbreaking bands in the history of modern music. In the peak of their fame, snobby music critics would describe the Beatles' music as so appallingly unmusical, so dogmatically insensitive to the magic of art that they qualify as crowned heads of anti-music. Just thinking about the Beatles seems to induce mental disturbance. They have a commonplace, rather dull act, sound like a group of disorganized amateurs. Not even their mothers would claim that they sing well. Kind of amusing how critically acclaimed they are now. In fact, I'd say listening to these guys offers a certain amount of cultural cred for anyone who enjoys music, but it's worth noting the specific focus these critics placed on their mostly young female fan base in particular. They were the subject of an especially eloquent type of public scorn. A 1964 piece from The Nation described the fanfare around their Carnegie Hall concert as not a real response to a real stimulus, commenting on how their largely female fan base would howl, let go, scream, bump, twist, and clutch themselves ecstatically out there in the floodlights for everyone to see. Later, they can all go home and grow up like their mommies, but this was their chance to attempt a very safe and very private kind of rapture. Another from Boston Globe, don't let the Beatles bother you. If you don't think about them, they will go away, and in a few more years, they will probably be bald. And teenagers, go ahead and enjoy your Beatlemania. The Liverpool lunacy is merely the 1964 version of a mild disease, which periodically sweeps across the country as the plagues of the Middle Ages once did. But my favorite would have to be this quote from the New Statesman. Those who flock round the Beatles, who scream themselves into hysteria, are the least fortunate of their generation. The dull, the idle, the failures. Their existence in such large numbers is a fearful indictment of our education system, which in 10 years of schooling can scarcely raise them to literacy. Tell us how you really feel. But of course, the Beatles is just one example of this trend. The same thing happened with then pretty boy teen heartthrob Elvis Presley, who was apparently seen as a threat to the moral being of young women due to his depraved hip thrusts, I guess. One columnist who wrote about how Elvis couldn't sing, play guitar, and dance even wrote in all caps how he wanted to give his Miami fangirls a solid slap across the mouth. Even worse was a headline from The Sun that read, "Daughter wants to see Elvis? Kick her in the teeth." That'd do it. And yet, for all the critics and disgruntled parents who called him distasteful, unrefined, a potential doom to rock and roll, he is now seen as one of the most influential and highly acclaimed artists of the music industry, and yes, in particular, rock and roll. Similarly, Frank Sinatra's army of Bobby Soxers, fangirls who were known for popularizing loose-fitting clothes among the youth, were bemoaned for ruining the tradition of American beauty, despite helping expand commercial fashion and consumer goods for the teenage market. Hell, even matinee idols weren't free of mockery back in the day. They were apparently an especially favorite subject of parody among other famous stars during their prime. And I don't want to dismiss a lot of the straight-up craziness female fans can exude. Like, sometimes fan devotion can turn into delusion. When you're spreading around intrusive conspiracy theories of your favorite teen idol at best, and literally stalking them to their actual flights at worst, and let's be real, that's probably not even the worst of them, that's a problem. But historically, fangirls are often more sensationalized to be crazy for being passionate over certain artists or interests compared to their male counterparts. This is a pretty overdone and cliched comparison, but male sports fans can also be some of the most uncivilized fan bases, from sending out death threats to burning shit in public to storming the court or streaking through the field, just to name a few insane and apparently recurring incidents within the community. And no, their hands aren't clean from cases of stalking either. Or even in music, heavy rock or metal concerts have way too many cases of male fans acting disruptive or just downright violent in the presence of their favorite artists. But typically, you aren't deemed nearly as uncool or tasteless or embarrassing, or if you were a straight guy, have your sexuality questioned, if you were to call yourself a sports fan or a metalhead, compared to, say, if you were to call yourself a believer or a directioner. People seem to scoff far more at those labels, despite the fact that all these fan bases from both ends have their fair share of screaming lunatics, and it's also worth noting that they don't necessarily represent their fandom as a whole. Am I saying men should start forcing themselves to love Justin Bieber or Twilight-era Robert Pattinson? No, I'm not even a fan of these guys myself, except for post-Good Time Pattinson. I love him. I'm not even saying the media should start further sensationalizing the batshit crazies and male-centric fandoms, apples and conflate the bad eggs with their entire community. Obviously, I don't believe moral panics are productive. The extremes on both sides are obviously bad and should be addressed, but there is this disappointing yet unsurprising double standard. And to bring it all back to the pretty boy stars whose fan bases are usually made up of mostly female fans, all this often comes at the price of their fame. I know, boo-hoo, these poor, pitiful, good-looking millionaires. Regardless, it's a trend nonetheless. Another catch with these dudes, specifically with actors, is the tendency to get typecast for your good looks. Typically, these guys start off their career constantly playing the romantic lead in a film. And while there isn't anything inherently wrong with the romance or rom-com genres, being as popular as they are, they tend to be riddled with cliched and often formulaic stories. As a result, budding actors typecast into these kinds of films are kind of restricted into these rigid character tropes and aren't able to flex their acting prowess as much. Again, before you come at me with all the amazing romances that do exist, I'm thinking more in line with Nicholas Sparks adaptations or the endless line of early 2000s rom-coms that always seem to feature Jennifer Lopez. But then also pair that with the fact that, historically, the romance genre has always been more criticized, often seen as inferior to other genres with its frivolous and shallow topics of love and affairs compared to more serious topics like war and politics and heroism. People are often more forgiving, I've found, with vapid action stories, for example, than a vapid romance. There's also something to be said about how most fans of romance are women and teenage girls. So this subconscious stigma, coupled with how a lot of projects from the fluffy romance factory often don't have the most substantial screenplays, means you'd often have to break out of this pretty boy rom-com era to gain more respect or credibility as an artist. Matthew McConaughey's career is a well-known instance of this, with people even labeling his transition to media roles in movies as the McConnaissance. Apparently coined by McConaughey himself, it referred to how he moved from romantic comedies like Ghosts of Girlfriends Past, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, The Wedding Planner, to the ongoing role of grittier, heavier projects like True Detective, Magic Mike, and Dallas Buyers Club, just to name a few of his most critically acclaimed latter performances. Interestingly enough, though, he's countered the notion that his rom-com projects involved less work or effort, stating that people would say he used to just roll out of bed and go, "Just keep living, dude," and now he got serious. No. I had just as many bookmarks and notes in those rom-coms as in True Detective or Dallas Buyers or Gold. Then, of course, we saw the same evolution with famed Twilight vampire Robert Pattinson, who shed his romantic 2000s persona for incredibly impressive, diverse performances in Good Time, The Lighthouse, and eventually as the Gotham vigilante himself in Matt Reeves' The Batman. Same thing with Channing Tatum to some extent, going from the eye candy with great moves to the eye candy with great moves with depth and nuance. Also turns out he's pretty great as a straight-up comedian. At those points in their careers, they're no longer just known as the pretty and usually shirtless dude in a love story. They can finally prove themselves as actors of greater range and versatility, which is great. This all having said, I can only imagine the struggle for some male stars if being pretty is too much a core part of your branding or career. I mean, you really then gotta prove how your skills extend beyond your image, or you'll end up fading into irrelevance along with your looks. The twink death, if you will.
Say your line exactly as I'm about to, just as I'm about to do.
Sure, okay.
Would that it were so simple.
Ooh. Would that it were so simple.
Would that it were so simple.
Would that it were so simple.
My dear boy, why do you say that? Why do you say twere?
Well, you should say it like I said it.
Yes.
Would that it were.
No, would that it were so simple. Trippingly.
Would that it were so simple. Trippingly.
No, don't say trippingly. Say the line trippingly.
Would that it were. Would that it.
This is probably why a lot of then teen idols reportedly resented how beloved they were for their looks. 90s heartthrob Leonardo DiCaprio had expressed his previous disdain for the title, sharing with the fan carpet, "At first I hated the way I was turned into a pretty boy, as if that was all that was expected of me. It made me almost want to stop acting for a while because the attention that was focused on me was not where I wanted to take my career." He also added that he steered clear of romantic films for a while post-Titanic, wary of any projects that simply tried to exploit his appearance. Other Hollywood it boys at the time, like Johnny Depp, Keanu Reeves, and River Phoenix, actively tried to subvert attention away from their pretty boy looks by choosing projects and donning public personalities personalities that strayed from the typical teen idol narrative. They were pretty heartthrob material, yes, but they had far more edge to them than, say, your regular Disney product, consciously choosing to play in darker, more avant-garde or action-packed films than your stereotypical romances. Hadley Freeman of The Guardian writes, "They signified not just a different kind of celebrity, but a different kind of masculinity. Desirable but gentle, manly but girlish. Depp in particular was the cool pinup it was safe to like, and the safe pinup it was cool to like. We fans understood that there was more to Depp, Phoenix, and Reeves than handsomeness." Of course, they were anomalies, some of the few notable stars barely struck by the curse of being a popular pretty boy, despite being one themselves. Now, despite the contempt these dudes may have traditionally faced at the height of their heartthrob fame and fangirl worship, the times have changed a bit, and it seems like the typical pretty boy aesthetic and persona is coming back stronger than ever, both in and out of Hollywood. I think we're currently in another golden era for pretty boys since the day matinee idols first came onto the scene. For one thing, being more fluid in your gender expression is definitely a lot more accepted and embraced today than it was 20 or so years ago. So adopting a softer, more metrosexual or androgynous look for your brand as a male star now isn't something you'll get as much flack for, at least most of the time. In fact, it's becoming a more popular aesthetic among everyday youth, landing the modern label of softboy, a term apparently coined by writer Alan Hansen in his 2015 Medium article, "Have You Encountered the Softboy?" Basically donning all the physical aspects and stereotypical traits of the pretty boy, the softboy challenges traditionally masculine archetypes by leaning more towards styles and interests typically associated with femininity. Instead of sports, he'll gush over books by J.D. Salinger or the emotional musings of Radiohead. He comes off well-read, is in touch with his feelings, loves anything vintage, and has a perpetual collection of pastel sweaters. Basically, he's, as Quartz puts it, the straight version of a gay male best friend. Though be warned, since there's also the kind of soft boy who knows just how to weaponize these very traits simply to get a woman in bed. He'll flaunt all the sentiments and politics and behaviors of your textbook-sensitive intellectual, only to drop the romantic act once he manages to score, or if you prove to actually be smarter than him. If the Instagram Beam Me Up Soft Boy teaches us anything, it's to beware the dudes who brag about masturbating to Bukowski. Seriously, this page features some of the funniest tactics these guys would pull under the soft boy facade. But of course, being the pretty boy 2.0, a major part of the soft boy's appeal is his outward appearance and attire. He's typically a lot more fashionable or glamorous and isn't afraid to experiment with more eccentric fashion. A popular subset of this trend is the whole e-boy look you've probably seen around online. And this evolved pretty boy aesthetic has even extended to high fashion, where big name designers are also now catering to the look. Dior, Gucci, and Celine Hum are just a few industry titans that have dabbled with softer designs in their clothing and challenged the typical masculine conventions of menswear. And recent Met Galas have also shown that even popular celebrities are willing to flaunt these gender-bending styles. In fact, plenty of the most accomplished and well-respected male stars today proudly embody these more delicate or eccentric looks. For some, it's part of what makes them an icon. And while their fangirls, as always, would likely be nothing but supportive of their fashion choices, there's also much less general pushback on the more feminine-coded ways they may choose to present themselves. I mean, Timothée Chalamet is like the quintessential pretty boy right now, drooled over by women from all walks of life, but yet he's also one of the most acclaimed actors currently and highly regarded by both female and male audiences. Whatever hate he does get definitely wouldn't compare to the vitriol thrown Robert Pattinson or Justin Bieber's way back in the late 2000s. And I also think the rise and continuously growing popularity of K-pop bands speaks for itself. These guys are beloved across the globe, and while yes, their fan bases are still overwhelmingly female, their iconic soft boy looks have managed to redefine the ideas and standards around male beauty, especially in Asia. China, Japan, and Thailand are now among the biggest consumers of the global male beauty market, followed closely by Indonesia, as Asian men are now embracing and experimenting with the same cosmetic, self-care, and grooming products that help achieve the more polished, delicate looks held by these male stars. The market for men's skincare and even makeup are now causing a huge boom throughout the continent, mainly led by specific products and beauty regimens endorsed by the latest K-pop idols. But of course, nowhere is this trend a bigger sensation in Asia than in South Korea itself. The country is currently considered to be leading the industry in this region, with Korean men reportedly using 13 beauty products a month on average. It's also apparently now more common for Korean men to walk into a salon, particularly in more fashionable or metropolitan cities, to get both their hair and makeup done for special occasions. But this appeal of softer masculinity isn't a completely new thing in Korea. Rather than being labeled a pretty boy or a soft boy, the country actually has its own term for this particular aesthetic, the flower boy, or, excuse me a second. Konminum? A name that combines the words for flower and beautiful man. Its roots actually span all the way back to the ancient Korean kingdom of Silla, where a group of elite male warriors were known as the hwarang, or flowering knight/gentleman, widely known for having androgynous good looks. According to Dr. Sun Young, author of Korean Masculinities and Transcultural Consumption, the modern flower boy takes inspiration from the bishonen character type, those strikingly beautiful young men of Japanese manga and anime. Interestingly though, Young differentiates this look from merely being labeled as feminine, and similarly to how The Guardian described Depp, Phoenix, and Reeves, says, "I think the phenomenon should rather be explained through the notion of hybrid or versatile masculinity, soft yet manly at the same time, which is different from effeminized." She then uses the example of Song Joong-ki's character in the K-drama Descendants of the Sun, in which he may have a flower boy appearance, but is still your stereotypical tough guy as a special forces captain. But outside of Asia, plenty have also attributed the rise of the Western soft boy aesthetic to the ongoing popularity of K-pop. And pair that with current day's gradual breakdown of gender stereotypes, our greater acceptance of self-expression, and the painstakingly curated images we share of ourselves on social media that have bore plenty of new ways to feel self-conscious or insecure, and it's no surprise male vanity's gotten more popular and commercialized on a whole. Just like in Asia, men's skincare and makeup are both gaining traction among Western male consumers as well. Luxury brand Chanel even released their very own collection of men's cosmetics in 2018. Labeled Boy de Chanel, the line featured foundation, lip balm, and even brow pencils. There's also the popular UK brand MMUK, which literally stands for Men's Makeup UK, where they offer all kinds of products including bronzer, concealer, anti-shine powder, and even beard fillers. I love how they have to make the eye makeup sound manlier though by naming it guyliner or mascara. In fact, The Guardian reveals how founder Alex Daly actually had to play it discreet with the company's online orders in the beginning. The article quotes, "Many customers would use different names when ordering and ask that their parcels be delivered in plain envelopes with no reference to makeup on them whatsoever. Discretion was paramount for customers when we began building the brand, and helping men find the right products was tricky for an online business." Another honorable mention would be the brand Warpaint, selling all kinds of skincare and makeup products in the manliest way possible, of course. With all this, it seems that the West is also growing to adopt the Korean perspective on makeup. As K-pop idol Holland puts it, in Korea, makeup has no gender or sexuality. Makeup is not just for women or necessarily feminine. It's for everyone. This evolution in male beauty culture has actually made both beauty and cosmetic products the fastest growing interest among male consumers since 2018, according to a report from GWI, peaking during the pandemic lockdowns and driven by the influence on social media. And not only does this coincide with today's pretty boy stars reclaiming their time in the spotlight, but male celebrities in general seem to be hopping in on the action. Big names like Harry Styles, Idris Elba, Pharrell Williams, and Jared Leto have all launched their very own cosmetic brands catered to men. And industry giants like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder have also taken to using well-known dudes as the face of their brand. Gen Z guys seem to be the prime target audience for these products, with a lot of them even creating beauty-related content on Instagram and TikTok, helping further drive sales. And speaking of Gen Z, it seems that this renewed enthusiasm for male beauty and self-care has lent itself to a relatively new, niche, very online trend known as
looksmaxxing.
Now, at its simplest, it's basically just a term for upgrading your physical attractiveness. So this could mean simply improving your hygiene practices, trying on a new hairstyle, getting in shape, using cosmetics, pretty healthy and harmless stuff. But as with all things on the internet, it can also extend to some pretty extreme methods, to say the least. Like the stuff I mentioned earlier are thankfully the most popular practices under looksmaxxing. Like I said, nothing wrong at all with wanting to take care of yourself and having vanity as a guy. It even gave birth to the now a viral trend of mewing, which is to basically reposition your tongue against the roof of your mouth in the belief it would permanently improve your facial structure and reshape your jawline. There's barely any scientific evidence to prove this, and it's become quite the meme in recent times. But hey, if it makes you feel more confident doing it, you ain't hurting anyone, do what you gotta do. But all these are actually considered on the softer end of the looksmaxxing spectrum. Softmaxxing, if you will. Stuff that's non-surgical and non-intrusive. But then you got the opposite. Hardmaxxing, which typically involves steroid use, getting hair transplants, or facial surgeries. Some who find that mewing doesn't actually lead to any real results may, for example, turn to actual chin or jawline replacements. In fact, today's cosmetic surgeons have reported a recent surge in male patients with Botox, fillers, and microdermabrasion procedures, leading the increasing interest in male plastic surgeries. And honestly, at the end of the day, if it makes them happier or changes their lives for the better, who am I to judge? But certain procedures or practices admittedly border on excessive, with some hard maxers even considering or pursuing limb lengthening operations, which, while safer today, still reportedly carries plenty of risk. Some also turn to disastrous DIY facial surgeries or apparently use products to appear more Caucasian in the name of white maxing. There's even stuff like starve maxing, which is closer to inducing an ED more than anything, and this thing called bone smashing, twisted from 19th century's Wolff's Law, which stated that bones under stress will eventually remodel themselves to become denser and stronger. But thankfully, it is apparently just a meme, and young guys out there aren't actually smashing their jaws in with a hammer. I hope. A lot of this stuff is, fortunately, far from having a real following, but there are some pretty concerning fringe cases nonetheless. So while on the surface, looksmaxxing can be a positive thing, it can also be easy for some to fall down the rabbit hole of more severe practices. And that's where this concept can warp into something that simply feeds the insecurities of vulnerable young men, where the community starts to hyperfixate on the supposed flaws or deformities they feel like they need to fix, when in reality, they never were to begin with. In an article for The Guardian, one looksmaxer admitted that the general vibe of this community was quite mean. They'd take images people had posted of their impressive physiques and be like, "You guys forgot to work out your faces. I was learning about problems I hadn't even noticed. I had a short face and a short chin, my nose was too wide, my eyes were too far apart, my hairline was too high." You don't see a lot of these things until someone else points them out, and then you can't stop seeing them. One thing to note is that the whole practice of looksmaxxing reportedly has its ties to the incel community of the manosphere. The term apparently originated from PSL forums, an acronym that stands for their most popular forum communities: PUA hate, or pickup artist hate, slut hate, and lookism, a term describing the discrimination people face based on their looks. Here, users would primarily discuss looksmaxxing and the red pill, an ideology that includes generalizing all women as hypergamous and superficial, and attributing this to the modern man's romantic difficulties, disregarding how these guys themselves may just have their own shortcomings to blame too. So the whole practice apparently has some pretty questionable roots, but I'd like to think that most of the guys following its surface level methods, at least, are far removed from that side of the community. But I think it is important to acknowledge the role that pretty privilege plays into fueling all of this. That is, the idea that those who are physically attractive tend to get away with and have more opportunities in life. The term is mostly brought up when referring to women, but obviously guys experience this too. In fact, recent findings by the University of Oslo suggest that being conventionally masculinely attractive actually has a greater impact on men's social mobility than that of women. I've spent this entire video talking about pretty boys and their allure and what draws people to them, particularly those of the opposite sex. And now that they're regaining their time in the limelight with greater prestige and commercial success than ever before, of course it's understandable that the everyman would want to emulate them. But I've noticed that while there's been ongoing discussion for years about unrealistic Hollywood images or media fantasies of female beauty and the impact that these have on women's self-esteem or self-image, there's considerably less conversation on how similar standards around male beauty affect how men and young boys see themselves. In fact, I personally don't see as much media buzz or broad online support around men's body issues. Usually the spotlight is on women when it comes to the whole current body positivity movement, but it's like, guys need that too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with admiring the hotter specimens among us humans. I will never complain about seeing my favorite pretty boys show up on my Instagram feed, but just as we've learned to not pressure women and young girls into these rigid ideas of beauty, I think it's also fair to make sure that men and young boys aren't feeling pressured into these extremely narrow boxes of what it means to be masculine or attractive. I was watching a Madisyn Brown video on the apparent rise of the medium uglies, which is a term people are using now to label men who don't exactly look like a Brad Pitt or Henry Cavill. The video dove into how it's also the online trend now to call any regular looking guy ugly. I mean, I know I've got horrendous vision, but are we really at a point where we're calling someone like Jeremy Allen White ugly? The whole thing's a bit of a catch-22 though, because a lot of these men are simultaneously a type for many. Hence the saying, I like my men medium ugly. So it's nice that in a way we are embracing more unconventional types of male beauty here, I guess. But at the same time, who wants to be called any level of ugly? I can only imagine the outrage if we saw these very sweaters on Amazon reading, I love medium ugly women. Like, it ain't a compliment. The internet will go for your head. But she also does make a point about how women have struggled with these very same criticisms for ages and continue to. I mean, again, blind as a bat here, but if Margot Robbie is mid, then what am I? I'm basically Gollum at this point. And so I guess it could feel like evening out the playing field or retribution even to levy these very same criticisms towards men and male celebrities. But then we'll just end up in a world where no one feels happy about how they look unless they look like Barbie or handsome Squidward, you know? None of it fixes anything. I do really recommend her video though, and the rest of her channel. She's very insightful. All in all, it's at least cool that we're now, more than ever, starting to celebrate softer or generally unconventional sides of masculine beauty. It's no longer just the hyper buff alpha jocks considered attractive to both genders, it's the golden age of twinks and skincare, it seems. So I ain't complaining. But what do you guys think about the rise and resurgence of the pretty boy archetype? We're apparently even experiencing the revival of the rom-com lately, so it'd be interesting to see how this would help their popularity thrive, or if the new age of rom-coms would do more to subvert the trope even. Do a little more commentary on obnoxious or manipulative soft boys, I don't know. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and favorite pretty boys down in the comments. And as always, if you enjoy video essays and commentary on pop culture and internet phenomenon like this one, feel free to subscribe and turn on that notification bell to keep up to date on my latest uploads, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.